Anthony Bourdain, thanks for joining us again.
Good to be with you.
It's good to have you back. Certainly one thing that seems clear in looking at your travels around the world dealing with food is that food has not become homogenized the way a lot of other things have in this globalized world.
No, I mean, I think the purest expression of a culture, of a place, of a even a personal history is always going to be food, or let's hope it always is. And I think a lot of some countries in particular really fiercely hang on to their culinary traditions, even when their citizens emigrate.
And in fact, the culinary traditions are oftentimes, as things become more globalized, the one thing that they can preciously hang on to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's encouraging to see how Koreans, for instance, have transplanted their food and absolutely refuse to adulterate it or modify it for American taste.
Talk a little bit about your travels, particularly in Asia first, and what you found there that was so remarkable.
Well, I mean, I think particularly when you're talking about Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia come to mind. They're so food crazy and food centric, coupled with the fact that they've been cooking and cooking well for a very, very long time. So great ingredients and great traditions of colors and flavors and fresh ingredients. So just particularly for me, a very, very exciting part of the world to eat in, where, first of all, it's a very, food-friendly environment, particularly when you're talking about a place like Singapore, where you have these open-air food courts of hawker stands with food specialists, one chef, one dish places, selling the very best of the China Straits and Chinese culinary culture, Indian food, Malay food, all in one place, all very cheaply. And people, rich and poor, eat many, if not most, of their meals at these places. And I love street food in that part of the world. There's just so much variety, and you can't get away with operating a business if you don't offer quality. And they know what they're talking about when they talk about food out there. So it's just a great place, and add that whole dimension of that pleasure-pain dimension of good spicy chili peppers, and I'm in heaven.
How much of that food, staying on Asia for the moment, how much of that food makes it here to the U.S. and in ethnic restaurants around the country?
Well, it's funny, when you see what is transplanted in authentic form, like a lot of the Japanese food. If anything, Japanese food back in Japan is being influenced very much by American ingredients and American tastes. You're seeing a lot of mayonnaise in sushi, for instance. And Chinese food is certainly getting better and better as more Chinese move here. They're able to support businesses that don't need to kind of alter traditional Chinese dishes for American taste, and you're getting a lot more and better regional Chinese. What we're really missing, of course, Thai and Vietnamese we've seen pretty well represented. But what we're totally missing is the amazing Singaporean, Malaysian food cultures, of that wonderful mix of Chinese, Malay, and Peranakan foods. And I would love to see that kind of venue and that spectrum of flavors and ingredients take root here, because we're really not seeing it. And the few like Singaporean restaurants or Malaysian restaurants we see are sit down at a table affairs, and that's really not the best way to enjoy that kind of food.
Why do you think that's had a harder time taking root here?
I think we don't have a food court, hawker stand, a food stall culture. I think largely for health concerns. But Singapore has really has managed that very, very well. They really rigorously and strictly enforce health regs there in far more draconian fashion than anything we've ever done here. So I think there's a lot of room for it.
What about your health concerns as you travel around the world and taste all of these exotic foods in exotic places?
I mean, I eat what's local. We have a pool on the show among the camera people and me, who's going to get sick first. And it's always the really careful members of the crew who are reluctant to eat street food. For me, if a food stall in a faraway land is busy with locals, chances are it's good. Otherwise, they can't stay in business poisoning their regular clientele. So I'm usually, make it through in very, very good shape. It's, you run into trouble when you go back to the your major chain hotel. and order an egg salad sandwich.
You devoted a whole chapter in the book to Beirut. Talk about that.
Well, it was one of the most discouraging and heartbreaking episodes of my life. I mean, I found myself in a wonderful city. It felt very much like Miami. I mean, very westernized, very tolerant, multi-ethnic. Everybody was getting along. A party town with a great food. The people were thrilled an American crew was there to eat. The war started 2 days in, and I found myself with my crew essentially trapped in Beirut, unable to leave. I mean, they'd blown up the airport. There was a sea blockade, and they were bombing the roads to Syria. So we found ourselves pretty much, trapped there for 10 days until the Marine Corps got us out.
And you left there, as you alluded to a minute ago, pretty discouraged, pretty depressed.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed, pointless and futile and ultimately destructive. I mean, this was a weak democratic government. I met a lot of nice people there, Sunni, Shiite, Christian, all of whom were, seemed to be getting along. It felt to me like a Rumsfeldian dream of what the Middle East should be, of what we want the Middle East to be, and yet we stood by and watched this place get pounded back 20 years. And who's more, powerful now? I mean, the bad guys, Hezbollah, they're more powerful than ever. They were a marginal party, have been, their reputation has been enhanced. They're the heroes now, and that's a pretty regrettable outcome.
Talk about Europe. What's new in terms of food in Europe? What do you still find that excites you there?
In Europe, Spain excites me. It's such a forward-thinking place where they're very supportive of the notion that any stretch of the imagination, any new technique, any departure is acceptable. Their long tradition of supporting the surrealists and the avant-garde has expressed itself brilliantly in the food. Both their traditional food and their new kind of futurist deconstructed cuisine is very, very, very exciting to top-end chefs. The pinchos or tapas culture is very exciting. Mm-hmm. And of course, I have a love affair with Italy. Just doing simple things with good, simple ingredients really, really well. That's something that always appeals to chefs.
How much of is American influence in food felt around the world? You mentioned Japan a little while ago. How much is American influence pervasive?
Well, if you were to ask, most of the world, anywhere in the world, what they see as American food, they're going to talk about, McDonald's, Burger King, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. That is the most pervasive and dominant aspect of our culinary traditions and possibly even our culture as a whole. Like it or not, that's the face of America for most of the world. That said, on the other end, the best restaurant in town, in Reykjavik or in Sao Paulo or Lima, is very much going to reflect kind of the new American, what we've come to know as new American cooking, a kind of fusion between French and some Asian influences and local ingredients. So there is a strange, eerie sense of familiarity at the best restaurant in a lot of places in the world right now. But really the dominant, you ask people what American food is, they're going to point at Ronald McDonald.
Is there something depressing about that?
Deeply depressing, yes.
And do you try to explain to people when you engage people about food as you're traveling around the world, obviously, do you explain to them, obviously, that this doesn't represent American food, although maybe a certain part of American culture? How do they grasp that? Or do they?
Well, I'd be lying, really. I mean, because if they came here, they'd pretty much, you wake up at any airport hotel anywhere in America and you look out your window, that's pretty much what you see is McDonald's, the King, these familiar brands of fast food. Surely there is so much more there, but I mean, at first glance, that's what it looks like. I think really the major impression we've made on the world that's universally kind of popular, and I think we kind of underestimate this, is how popular and how important and influential American music, particularly rap music and rock music, are around the world. That has really struck a chord with people everywhere, particularly rap.
Aside from Western Europe, how are chefs, the people that prepare food, how are they viewed in the rest of the world versus here?
I think there's been a general rise in the prestige of the profession in the last 10, 15 years. In the old days, if in Western Europe, you became a chef because you were the second smartest male child, or you came from a poor family, or because your parents did it. You were essentially packed off to hotel school or to an apprenticeship at a very early age, and you didn't have much choice. And it was a fairly low prestige profession, even if you did well. That's changed, and I think as that has changed, I mean, it's more of a glamour profession now.
Throughout the world. What did you find in Africa?
Well, I did not like Namibia much, but I loved Ghana. Ghana was very, very exciting. One of the things that really struck me was, well, first, how good the food was, how vibrant and spicy and varied, and how incredible a country that is, and how hopeful a place. But one of the things that really struck me was that I listened to traditional music of Ghana, and I said, wait a minute, I know these sounds. These are, this is rap, this is, I hear these sounds in reggae, in jazz, in blues, in rock and roll. It's like all the music that I've come to know as an American birthright. So much of those fundamental noises, originated in Africa. And I also found that same thing to be true with the food. I said, wait a minute, this is kind of like, traditional Southern cooking. This is like gumbo. I see where a lot of things that we see as, original American have really been influenced by, African food, West African food.
Mm-hmm. There seems to be tremendous vibrancy, as you write about it and picture it, of the foods and what's going on in South America right now.
Well, I mean, that's I love going there. Brazil is a very exciting place. Peru is their traditional foods are wonderful. I mean, they're incredible looking places with incredible looking people and very again becoming increasingly food centric. But I was very pleasantly surprised, like how hip and how fun and places like Lima, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires are, and how good the modern food is, and how things have changed.
Having traveled so far and wide, what still surprises you about food in the world?
I'm constantly surprised by how good, how fresh food is in countries where there's very little refrigeration and where people are poor, like Vietnam. I mean, it's stunning how good, how fresh, how much fresher than ours often food can be in a less industrialized country. China is, you could live there the rest of your life and it would be a surprise every day. You hit whole new spectrums of sort of pleasure and pain when you're talking like Sichuan province, for instance, where eating Sichuan hot pot can be a very pleasurably sadomasochistic experience. You move into whole new areas of enjoyment of food that you really didn't think it's hard to imagine before you've been there that you could be there at a table holding your stomach in pain and a full flop sweat, having the time of your life.
And how much of this do you desire personally to bring back to your customers in New York, to your restaurant?
None at all. I mean, I'm an old school French brasserie bistro cook. That's what I should do. That's what I'm strong at. I'm not so arrogant as to think that a few weeks in China makes me a Chinese cook or makes me a chef who could, by bringing some of those ingredients back in any way, add anything to it took them thousands of years to get it right. What do I have to add to that?
So how did you get started?
Well, I started as a dishwasher and fell in love with the lifestyle and fell in love with the restaurant business, and just I liked being among cooks and in a restaurant and doing something with all that immediate gratification and sort of quantifiable stats for success. And after a while, I realized while I was having a lot of fun at it and I was a good journeyman cook. I was not, my technique was nothing special, and I wanted to be better, and I went to the Culinary Institute and finished the program there, and then got back into the business.
What is the lure of that lifestyle? What is it? Is it showbiz? What is it that hooks people?
Well, I think it's always attracted the same kind of people. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's running away with the circus. It's a subculture of misfits and very creative people, people who, for one reason or another, are uncomfortable in in a 9-to-5 office job. They just don't want to do it, can't do it, feel uncomfortable in that world, like working with their hands, using their senses. They're generally people with a little crazy. And I think if you read the books about the business going back hundreds of years, you're going to find pretty much the same personality types, almost whatever country you're in.
And what are you looking at now? What's interesting to you that's going on in the business?
I'm really interested in a lot of the fine dining chefs who are deciding they've just had enough of the glass, all the expensive glassware and the elaborate service and flowers and all the nonsense that has nothing to do with food, and are stripping their food down to become much more authentic, and the environment in which it's eaten a lot more casual. I think Joe Robuchon has done that with the L'Atelier concept in New York and Vegas, and there are a few chefs around who are really just trying to do it right, do it authentic, and have it all about the food and less about the nonsense.
Anthony Bourdain, no reservations, around the world on an empty stomach. Tony, I thank you so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. It was fun.